The Galactic Empire had ruled the stars for 12,000 years, and in all that time no one had ever challenged their power or questioned their right to rule over every species. They encountered Admiral Vorath, stood on the bridge of his command ship and watched the endless darkness of space through the massive viewing window that stretched across the front of the vessel. He was a proud member of the Hegemony fleet, and he had served the Empire for 300 years without ever facing a true challenge. The frontier world of Callus Prime floated below his fleet like a jewel of blue and green, and his garrison of 50 warships kept watch over this section of space, as they had done for centuries. Nothing ever happened here, and Vorath had grown comfortable with the quiet routine of patrol duty. Then the alarm began to sound. "Admiral, we are detecting an unknown vessel emerging from uncharted space," his sensor officer called out with confusion in his voice. Vorath turned slowly and walked to the tactical display at the center of his bridge. A single red dot had appeared on the edge of the system, and it was not moving toward them or away from them. It simply hung there in the void, like it was waiting for something. "What is it?" Vorath asked without much concern in his voice. "Unknown, sir, and we have no record of this vessel type in our database." Vorath made a dismissive sound and waved his hand. "It is probably some lost merchant ship, or perhaps a probe from one of those minor species we have not yet catalogued." He gave the order to send 3 patrol cruisers to investigate and escort the unknown vessel to a processing station, where its crew would be questioned and its technology would be assessed for potential value to the Empire. This was standard protocol, and Vorath had done it 100 times before. The 3 cruisers accelerated away from the main fleet, and Vorath watched them go with complete confidence that this matter would be resolved. Within the hour, he returned to his command chair and began reviewing reports from other sectors. 20 minutes passed, then 30, then an hour. "Admiral, the patrol cruisers have not reported back," the communications officer said with growing worry. In her voice, Vorath frowned and stood up again. "Contact them directly." "I have tried, sir, but there is no response on any channel." Now Vorath felt the first small spark of concern in his chest. He ordered long-range sensors to scan the area where the cruisers should have been. What came back made no sense at all. "Sir, we are detecting debris in that sector, and the energy signatures match our patrol cruisers." "Debris?" Vorath repeated the word like he did not understand it. "Yes, Admiral, and all 3 vessels appear to have been completely destroyed." The bridge fell silent, and every officer turned to look at their admiral. Vorath stared at the tactical display, where 3 friendly markers had simply vanished and been replaced by a scattered field of wreckage. "How is this possible?" he whispered. He ordered a full analysis team to examine the debris field from a safe distance, and what they reported back 3 hours later disturbed him more than the destruction itself. The patrol ships had not been destroyed by plasma weapons or guided missiles, or any other weapon system in the galactic registry. The damage patterns suggested kinetic impact from crude projectiles that had been accelerated to unbelievable speeds. "This makes no sense," the chief science officer said as he presented his findings to Vorath. "No advanced species has used kinetic weapons in millennia, because they are primitive and inefficient compared to energy weapons. And yet 3 of my ships are now scattered across space." Vorath replied with anger building in his voice. He turned back to the tactical display and stared at the single red dot that still had not moved from its original position. The unknown vessel remained exactly where it had appeared, and it had made no attempt to flee or advance. It was just sitting there in the darkness watching them. Vorath felt something he had not experienced in 300 years of service. He felt uncertain. The ship was large, but not by imperial standards of length. However, the energy readings coming from it were unlike anything his sensors had ever recorded. The density of power within that vessel was simply impossible according to everything he knew about starship engineering. "What are you?" he muttered to himself as he studied the readings. The alien ship had a brutal appearance with sharp angles and heavy plating that covered every surface. There were no elegant curves or artistic flourishes that defined civilized warship design. It looked like it had been built for one purpose, and one purpose only: war. Varath opened a channel to the unknown vessel and demanded identification. There was no response. He repeated his demand in every language the Empire had recorded. Over 12,000 years of expansion. Still nothing. The alien ship simply hung there in silence, and Varath could not shake the feeling that it was studying him just as he was studying it. He sent his report to the core worlds and requested additional forces and guidance from Imperial High Command. The response came within hours. The High Inquisitor herself would be dispatched with a full diplomatic flotilla to investigate this matter. Varath was ordered to maintain position and observe, but not engage the unknown vessel. He acknowledged the order and settled in to wait. For 3 days, his fleet watched the alien ship, and the alien ship watched them back. Neither side moved and neither side communicated. Varath found himself sleeping poorly during those 3 days, because every time he closed his eyes, he saw the debris field where his patrol cruisers had been destroyed. 3 ships gone in an instant against a single unknown enemy. He had underestimated them once and paid the price. He would not make that mistake again. On the 4th day, the High Inquisitor's flotilla arrived with 20 of the most advanced warships in the Imperial Navy. Varath felt relief wash over him as he watched them take position around his garrison. Fleet. Surely now this matter would be resolved. Surely now the arrogant alien vessel would learn the true power of the Galactic Empire. He could not have been more wrong. The unknown ship remained motionless and silent as the combined fleet surrounded it, and somewhere deep in its metal heart, Commander Sarah Chun of the Terran Navy watched the tactical display and smiled. The Empire had finally noticed humanity. Now the real conversation could begin. High Inquisitor Thisra had served the Galactic Empire for 500 years, and she had never failed to bring a species to heel. She was tall and elegant, with silver skin that shimmered in the light and eyes that held the cold confidence of absolute power. Her title gave her authority over all diplomatic and military matters in the frontier regions, and she answered only to the fiery Emperor himself. When she received the report about the unknown vessel at Calith Prime, she had been annoyed, more than concerned. Some primitive species had stumbled into Imperial space and destroyed 3 patrol cruisers through luck or trickery. It happened from time to time, and the solution was always the same. A show of overwhelming force followed. By the complete submission of the offending species, they would become vassals of the Empire, and their world would be added to the ever-growing list of conquered territories. This was the way of things, and it had been the way of things for 12,000 years. Thisra arrived at Calith Prime with 20 of the finest warships in the Imperial Navy, and she felt nothing but contempt as she gazed upon the alien vessel for the first time. It was ugly and crude, and it looked like something a child might build if given metal and tools, but no understanding of proper design. Open a channel to the unknown vessel, she commanded from her throne, like chair on the bridge of her flagship. Channel open, High Inquisitor. Thisra spoke with the voice of authority that had made countless species tremble. Unknown vessel, you have entered the sovereign territory of the Galactic Empire, and you have committed acts of aggression against our forces, and you will identify yourself immediately and surrender to Imperial justice or face total annihilation. For a long moment, there was only silence. Then the view screen flickered and a face appeared. Thisra felt her breath catch in her throat. The being on the screen was disturbing in its familiarity. 2 arms and 2 legs and a head with 2 eyes facing forward like a predator. It looked almost like a dozen other species the Empire had encountered over the millennia, yet it was clearly something new. I am Commander Sarah Chen of the Terran Battleship Defiance, the creature said in perfect Imperial standard. Thisra leaned forward on her throne. How do you know our language? The human smiled, and there was something unsettling about the expression. "We have been listening to your communications for quite some time, High Inquisitor, and learning your language was simple enough once we cracked your encryption protocols, and we have also been studying your empire and reading your histories and analyzing your military capabilities. Impossible," Thesra hissed. "No species could breach Imperial communications without detection. And yet here we are having this conversation in your own language." Thesra felt anger rising in her chest, but she forced herself to remain calm. "What are your intentions, human? And why have you come to our space?" Commander Chun's expression became serious. "We detected your empire's expansion toward our home systems approximately 2 centuries ago, and we have spent that time preparing for this moment, and the Defiance was sent as an envoy to make contact and deliver a message." "And what message would that be?" "We do not want war, High Inquisitor, and humanity has no desire to destroy your empire or conquer your worlds. And we simply want to live in peace and chart our own destiny among the stars." Thesra laughed, and the sound echoed across her bridge. "You speak of peace, yet you destroyed 3 of my patrol cruisers. They opened fire on us first, and we defended ourselves, and we used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat." "Minimum force," Thesra repeated with disbelief. "Yes, and if we had used maximum force, there would be nothing left to analyze, and your scientists would still be wondering what happened." Thesra waved her hand dismissively. "You have destroyed 3 small patrol vessels through some trick or another, and now you think you can threaten the Galactic Empire, and we have millions of warships, human, and 10,000 worlds. And you are 1 vessel alone in hostile space." "I understand how this must look from your perspective," Commander Chun replied. "But I need you to understand something very important before you make any decisions." "And what is that?" The human leaned closer to the screen, and her eyes were steady and calm. "This is not our battleship, High Inquisitor." Thesra frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean that the Defiance is classified as a reconnaissance vessel in the Terran Navy, and what you are looking at is a scout ship." The bridge fell completely silent. Thesra stared at the view screen and tried to process what she had just heard. The massive vessel that had destroyed 3 Imperial cruisers without taking damage was a scout ship. "You are lying," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "I have no reason to lie, and in fact, I have every reason to tell you the truth, because we want you to understand exactly what you are dealing with." Commander Chun pressed something on her console, and the data package began transmitting to the Imperial flagship. "I am sending you our census data and the coordinates of our home systems and the schematics for the Defiance so your engineers can verify its classification." Thesra gestured for her officers to receive the transmission. "Why would you give us this information?" "Because we are not here to play games or engage in deception, and humanity has nothing to hide, and we want a relationship with your empire based on honesty and mutual respect. And if we refuse," Commander Chun's expression did not change, "then you will learn why our actual battleships are 4 times the size of this vessel." Thesra studied the human's face and saw no fear and no hesitation. This creature genuinely believed that her single ship could stand against the greatest military force the galaxy had ever known. Either she was completely insane, or she knew something that Thesra did not. "I will review your data and consult with my advisors," Thesra said carefully. "Take all the time you need, High Inquisitor, but I want to leave you with one final thought. Speak. We know where your throne world is, and we know the patrol routes of your fleets, and we have been inside your communication networks for years, and if your empire moves against our people, there will be no second warning." The transmission ended. Thesra sat in silence as her officers began analyzing the human data, and for the first time in 500 years, she felt something she had almost forgotten existed. She felt afraid. High Inquisitor Thesra spent 12 hours reviewing the data that the humans had transmitted, and the more she studied it, the more her unease grew. Her science officers confirmed that the schematics were genuine and that the vessel they faced was indeed classified as a reconnaissance ship in what the humans called the Terran Navy. If those schematics were accurate, then their actual warships were monsters of metal and firepower, beyond anything the Empire had ever constructed. But Thesra had not risen to her position by accepting the claims of unknown species at face value. The humans could have fabricated everything in that data package to intimidate the Empire into backing down. It would not be the first time a weaker species had tried such a bluff. She gathered her senior commanders in the war room of her flagship and laid out the situation before them. "We have two options," she said, as she paced before the tactical display. "We can accept the human claims and report to the Emperor that we have encountered a power that exceeds our own capabilities, or we can test those claims and discover the truth for ourselves." Admiral Varath, who had been silent since Thesra arrived, finally spoke up. "High Inquisitor, I have seen what that ship can do, and it destroyed 3 of my cruisers in seconds without taking any damage." 3 patrol cruisers, Thesra replied with a dismissive wave. "Small vessels with minimal armament, and we now have 23 warships including my flagship, which carries enough firepower to crack a planet." "With respect, High Inquisitor, your caution is noted, Admiral, but I did not achieve my position by running from every species that makes bold claims, and the Empire has ruled for 12,000 years because we do not show weakness." She turned to her tactical officer. "Signal all ships to surround the human vessel and prepare to fire on my command." The order went out, and the Imperial fleet began to move. 23 warships formed a perfect sphere around the Defiance and locked their weapons on target. Thesra opened a channel to the human ship. "Commander Chun, you have made impressive claims about your capabilities, and now you will prove them, or you will die." The human appeared on screen, and her expression was calm and unsurprised. "I hoped it would not come to this, High Inquisitor. Surrender now, and your crew will be treated as prisoners of war rather than criminals." "I am afraid that is not possible." "Then you leave me no choice." Thesra gave the order to fire. What happened next would be studied by Imperial military academies for centuries to come. The moment the Imperial weapons discharged, the Defiance moved. It should not have been possible for a vessel of that size to accelerate so quickly, but the human ship twisted and spun through the incoming fire with mechanical precision plasma. Bolts that should have vaporized the hull passed through empty space where the ship had been a fraction of a second before. Guided missiles that could track a target across an entire star system somehow lost their lock and spiraled off into the void. And then the Defiance fired back. The kinetic rounds were invisible to the naked eye because they moved too fast to track. They punched through Imperial shields like they did not exist and tore through armor plating like it was made of paper. Thesra watched in horror as her flagship shuddered from multiple impacts, and the entire forward section simply disappeared in a spray of debris. 3 destroyers tried to concentrate their fire on the human vessel, and they died for their effort. The Defiance cut through them like a blade through water and left nothing but expanding clouds of wreckage. "All ships fall back," Thesra screamed as she gripped her command chair to stay upright. But the human ship was already among them, and there was nowhere to run. 7 more Imperial vessels died in the next 30 seconds, and Thesra could do nothing but watch as the pride of the hegemony fleet was torn apart. Then suddenly, impossibly, the Defiance stopped firing. The human ship came to rest at the center of the debris field it had created and went silent. Commander Chun's face appeared on the view screen again. "Your weapons cannot hurt us, High Inquisitor, but we did not come here to destroy your fleet." Thesra stared at the human with blood running down her face from a cut on her forehead. "Then why did you stop?" "Because we came to deliver a message, not to start a war. You have killed thousands of my people, and I regret every death, but you gave us no choice, and we defended ourselves just as we did against your patrol cruisers. Thishra looked at the tactical display of her 23 warships. Only 9 remained functional, and most of those were badly damaged. The Defiance had not taken a single hit. "What do you want?" she asked in a voice that had lost all its confidence. "I want you to take our data to your Emperor, and I want you to tell him that humanity extends its hand in friendship, and we have much to offer each other, including trade and technology and cultural exchange." And if he refuses, Commander Chun's eyes hardened. "Then tell him what you witnessed here today, and tell him that this was one scout ship fighting defensively, and tell him that we have thousands more, and tell him to imagine what would happen if we decided to fight offensively." Thishra said nothing. "We do not want to be your enemy, High Inquisitor, and humanity has spent its entire history fighting wars, and we are very tired of it, and we want peace and prosperity and the chance to explore the stars alongside other species. But we will never kneel, and we will never submit, and we will never allow ourselves to be conquered. And if your empire forces us to fight, we will not stop until one of us no longer exists." The transmission ended. Thishra sat alone on her damaged bridge, surrounded by the bodies of her crew, and stared at the stars. For 12,000 years, the Galactic Empire had been the supreme power in the galaxy. That era had just ended. She gave the order to retreat and began composing her report to the Emperor. He would not be pleased, but he needed to know the truth. The humans were coming, and the Empire was not prepared. The throne room of the Galactic Empire was the largest enclosed space ever constructed by any known civilization. Golden pillars rose 300 meters into the air and supported a ceiling that displayed a perfect image of the galaxy in real time. 12,000 years of conquest and expansion had built this monument to absolute power, and at its center sat the Emperor himself on a throne carved from the heart of a collapsed star. His name was Zarveth the Eternal, and he had ruled the Empire for 800 years. He was ancient and terrible and wise, and he had never known defeat. Until now, the War Council stood before him in a half-circle of glittering uniforms and nervous faces. High Inquisitor Thishra knelt at the foot of the throne with her head bowed and the evidence of her failure written in the scars that now marked her silver skin. She had delivered her report in person as protocol demanded, and the Emperor had listened in complete silence. Now he spoke, and his voice rolled through the throne room like thunder. "You are telling me that a single alien vessel destroyed 14 of our warships and suffered no damage in return?" "Yes, my Emperor. And you are telling me that this vessel was merely a scout ship?" "According to their data, yes, my Emperor." "And you believe this data to be accurate?" Thishra raised her head and met the Emperor's gaze. "I do, my Emperor, because I saw what that ship could do, and if that was only a fraction of their true capability, then we face an enemy unlike any we have encountered before." The Emperor sat back on his throne and studied the holographic display that floated before him. It showed the census data that the humans had provided along with their star maps and military specifications. 300 colony worlds, he said quietly. 40 billion people and a fleet that numbers in the tens of thousands. And technology that exceeds our own by several generations, one of the War Council members added. "Our scientists have analyzed the data, and they believe the humans have been developing in isolation for at least 2,000 years. "How is that possible?" another counselor demanded. "How could a species advance so far without our knowledge?" "They were careful," Thishra answered. "They stayed hidden and watched us from the shadows and learned everything they could about our strengths and weaknesses, and they only revealed themselves when they were ready." The Emperor made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Clever little creatures and patient too, and those are dangerous qualities in an enemy." He stood from his throne and walked down the steps to stand among his counselors. Despite his age, he moved with the grace of a predator, and every eye in the room followed him with a mixture of fear and reverence. "What are our options?" he asked. The Minister of War stepped forward and bowed. "My Emperor, we could launch an immediate offensive against their home systems, and we have millions of ships, and we could overwhelm them through sheer numbers before they have a chance to prepare." "And what would be the cost?" The minister hesitated. "Hi, my Emperor, and our projections suggest we would lose approximately 40% of our fleet in such an engagement." 40%, the Emperor repeated. "That is 2 million ships and countless lives." "Yes, my Emperor, but we would achieve victory." "Would we?" The Emperor turned to face the holographic display again. "There. Scout ship destroyed 14 of our vessels without taking damage. And what happens when we face 1,000 of their actual warships? And what happens when we attack their fortified systems, where they have had centuries to prepare defenses?" "No." One answered, "I have ruled this empire for 800 years." The Emperor continued, "And in that time I have conquered more worlds than any of my predecessors, and have built the greatest military force the galaxy has ever known, and I have done this through wisdom as much as strength." He turned back to face his council. "A wise ruler knows when to fight and when to negotiate, and a wise ruler does not throw away his empire in a war he cannot win." The Minister of War looked shocked. "My Emperor, surely you are not suggesting that we submit to these humans?" "I am not suggesting we submit to anyone, and I am suggesting that we find another way." He gestured to Thisra. "The humans said they wanted peace and trade and cultural exchange, and they said they would only fight if we attacked them first. They could be lying, my Emperor. Perhaps, but they could also be telling the truth. And the only way to know for certain is to test their words." He made his decision. "We will send ambassadors to the coordinates they provided, and we will negotiate with these humans as equals. And we will learn everything we can about them and their capabilities. And if they reject our ambassadors, then we will know they were never interested in peace, and we will have time to prepare for war. But I do not believe that will happen, because a species that reveals its strength before attacking is not a species seeking conquest." The Emperor returned to his throne and sat down. "They showed us mercy at Calith Prime, and they could have destroyed Thisra's entire fleet, but they chose to stop, and that tells me something important about their character." "What does it tell you, my Emperor?" "It tells me that they have been warriors long enough to grow tired of war, and it tells me that they value life, even the lives of their enemies, and it tells me that they might actually mean what they say about wanting peace." He raised his hand, and the holographic display shifted to show both the Empire and the human territories. "We have ruled alone for 12,000 years, and perhaps it is time for that to change. And perhaps the galaxy is large enough for two great powers to exist side by side." The War Council exchanged uncertain glances. This was not the response they had expected, but the Emperor had spoken, and his word was law. The ambassadors were dispatched within the week, and they carried with them an offer of peace and recognition from the most powerful civilization the galaxy had ever known. The humans had forced the impossible. They had made the Empire blink. The Treaty of Helios was signed on a space station that floated in neutral territory between human and imperial space. It was the most significant document in galactic history since the founding of the Empire itself. For the first time in 12,000 years, the Galactic Empire formally recognized another power as its equal. Humanity had achieved in 3 years what no other species had managed in millennia. They had earned respect. Ambassador Theron led the imperial delegation, and he spent months negotiating with his human counterparts over every detail of the agreement. Trade routes were established and tariffs were set, and borders were defined with careful precision. But more importantly, a framework for cooperation was created that would shape the future of both civilizations. The humans proved to be fascinating negotiating partners. They were direct and honest, and they kept their word even when it would have been advantageous to break it. They argued passionately for their positions, but they also listened to opposing viewpoints and changed their minds when presented with compelling evidence. This was something the Empire had never encountered before. Vassal species either submitted completely or they were crushed. The concept of genuine negotiation between equals was almost forgotten. Ambassador Theron reported his observations to the Emperor and suggested that the humans might actually be trustworthy allies rather than enemies waiting for an opportunity to strike. The Emperor ordered his scholars to study humanity in greater depth. What they discovered changed everything. Humans were not exceptional because of any single trait. They were not the strongest species in the galaxy, and they were not the smartest, and they did not live the longest. The Kreth were physically more powerful, and the Villani had greater intellectual capacity, and the syndicate races measured their lifespans in millennia. But humans possessed something that none of those species had. They had an absolute refusal to accept limits. When humans encountered a problem, they did not accept defeat. They adapted and innovated and persevered until they found a solution when their own planet became too damaged to sustain. Then they developed the technology to heal it. When they ran out of resources on one world, they spread to others. When they discovered the existence of the Empire, they did not despair at the vast disparity in power. They simply began building the fleet they would need to defend themselves. This drive, this relentless determination to overcome every obstacle, was what made humanity dangerous. And it was also what made them valuable. The Emperor realized that an alliance with humanity could strengthen the Empire in ways that conquest never could. Human scientists began working alongside Imperial researchers, and the rate of technological advancement increased dramatically. Human traders opened new markets and created wealth that benefited both civilizations. Human artists and philosophers brought fresh perspectives to cultures that had grown stagnant over thousands of years. But the most significant change came not from the humans themselves, but from the example they set, the empires. Vassal species had been watching the events at Calith Prime with great interest. For millennia, they had accepted their subjugation as inevitable, because no one had ever successfully resisted the Empire. Now they knew that resistance was possible. Whispers began spreading through the vassal worlds. If the humans could stand against the hegemony, then perhaps others could too. The Emperor faced a choice. He could crack down on the growing unrest and crush any species that dared to dream of freedom, or he could adapt. He chose to adapt. Over the following decades, the structure of the Empire began to change. Vassal species were granted representation in the Imperial Council. Restrictions on technology and travel were lifted. The brutal system of domination and submission that had defined galactic civilization for 12,000 years slowly transformed into something new. It was not democracy, and it was not equality in the human sense, but it was better than what had come before. 50 years after the Defiance first appeared at Calith Prime, the galaxy was unrecognizable. The Galactic Empire still existed, but it had become something more like a federation of allied species than a conquering power. Trade flourished and technology advanced, and for the first time in recorded history, there was genuine peace among the stars. Commander Sarah Chun retired from the Terran Navy with the rank of Admiral, and she spent her final years on a quiet colony world writing her memoirs. On the centennial of First Contact, she gave one last interview to a reporter who asked her to reflect on everything that had happened. "What do you think humanity's greatest strength is, Admiral?" Chun smiled, and her eyes still held the same steady confidence they had shown on that day when she faced down the entire Imperial fleet. "We are stubborn," she said. "We look at impossible things, and we refuse to accept them, and when someone tells us that something cannot be done, we take that as presence. A challenge rather than a limitation. But surely stubbornness alone cannot explain everything your people have achieved. Maybe not, but it is the foundation. And you see, we come from a small planet in an unremarkable corner of the galaxy, and for most of our history, we did not even know there was anyone else out there, and we had to learn everything on our own and fight for every advancement and survive. every disaster without help from anyone. She paused and looked out the window at the stars. That made us strong, and it made us adaptable, and it taught us that we could rely on ourselves no matter what. And when we finally discovered that the galaxy was full of ancient powers who wanted to conquer us, we did not panic. What did you do? We prepared and we built and we waited, and when the time came, we showed them who we were. The reporter nodded and made a note. Do you have any regrets, Admiral, about how things turned out? Chum was quiet for a long moment. I regret the lives that were lost at Calith Prime, and I regret that it took a battle to make the Empire listen. But I do not regret the outcome, because the galaxy is a better place now than it was when we arrived, and humans and Imperials work together. And the vassal species have hope, and that matters. One final question, Admiral, and what would you say to the young humans who are just now learning about first contact in their history classes? Chum turned back to face the reporter, and her smile widened. I would tell them to be proud of who they are, and to never let anyone tell them what they cannot do. And I would tell them that the galaxy is vast and full of wonders and dangers, and that humanity has earned its place among the stars through blood and sacrifice and determination. And I would tell them that this is only the beginning. In the archives of what had once been the Galactic Empire, historians recorded the events that had reshaped civilization. They called it the human emergence, and they studied it endlessly, trying to understand how one species had changed everything. In the margins of those records, an anonymous scholar had written a single observation that would be quoted for centuries to come. They were not prepared for humanity. None of us were. Perhaps that was the point.